And I wanted to ask you, because obviously you worked on the Hill for many years. You worked on Bernie's campaign. Obviously, there's a food fight, as usual, on the left. But it seems to me Joe Manchin's one person, yet he's kind of having equal, if not more power than President Biden. Not on foreign policy, obviously, but domestically, he's basically said, I'm going to shut things down if I don't get my way. Yet Bernie, the squad plus however many there are, 7 to 10, have, on the coronavirus bill, they chose, let's just take what we can get. And now on the infrastructure, they're not even preemptively saying, no, dead on arrival unless we get X, Y, and Z. You've kind of written about that in terms of leveraging power and why is Manchin doing so, but it doesn't seem like the progressives are. Have you found any answers? Is there some long-term strategy we don't know about? Because I'm kind of baffled. I'm not calling them frauds, but I'm kind of baffled why you do have the numbers, more numbers than Joe Manchin, but the progressives in the House and Senate aren't playing that hardball.
Well, I think I'm inferring here that what they believe is that the foundation of the legislation, the various bills in question, are inherently more progressive than the current status quo. So they believe that the foundation of what they have, whether corporate tax reform, the infrastructure bill, the stimulus bill, that the basics of the bill are good, and that if they fight too hard, draw too many lines in the sand over additional good things, that it could somehow take down the entire bill, which they care about because they would argue that the foundation of the bill, whether the other things that are get put in it or not, are good. And that Manchin and that the right wing of the Democratic Party more generally doesn't care about the good things in the bill, is willing to take down those good things of the bill if they don't get their way on the things that they want. And look, in fairness, I think that's a matter of opinion. Right. I mean, I have my opinion. You have your opinion. The progressives in Congress have their opinion on whether they're driving a hard enough bargain, whether it is actually true that in a sort of alternate future, whether a bill would get taken down or not if they draw a line in the sand. My view is that they have a lot of leverage that they have refused to use, especially on must-pass pieces of legislation that the White House considers signature initiatives, that by drawing lines in the sand, making clear demands, that they will pull Joe Biden off of the sidelines in many ways, force the White House to actually use its enormous power, the enormous power of the executive branch, to actually move legislation, pressure the right wing of the Democratic Party to get on board. And that the only way to actually motivate them is to say, if X, Y, and Z is not in the bill, you cannot count on our votes. Obviously, that's exactly what Joe Manchin does, right? Joe Manchin, I mean, literally on the corporate tax rate this week, he said something to the effect of, I don't want it at 28%. I want it at 25%. And I'm essentially not going to vote for anything that doesn't provide me what I want. That's essentially saying I'm happy to take this bill down if my demands on this issue are not met. And that's where he draws his power. And progressives have a similar amount of power that they have not been willing to use. And it's my view that if they did use that power, let's use the corporate tax rate as an example. If the progressives said, listen, we're not voting for a bill that doesn't have a corporate tax rate, at least where Joe Biden is proposing it to be, at 28%. Like, our line in the sand is just where even this Democratic president says he is. Then you've got one poll of the party saying we're drawing a line in the sand at 28%. You've got Joe Manchin saying he's drawing a line in the sand at 25%. And now you've got a situation in which Joe Biden and the executive branch has to not just sort of step back and say, hey, you guys work it out. They've actually got to engage. And that's actually what we want, or what we should want. A dynamic in which the White House is using its enormous political power to actually drive the agenda. Now, I know there are some folks who say, well, this is a lot of nonsense. The president doesn't have very much power. There's this whole idea, the so-called Green Lantern theory that kind of pundits use to mock the left. This idea that the progressives seem to think that the president has all this power and the president's a superhero, and actually he doesn't have any power. And of course, this narrative shifts every 4 years, right? Like, if there's a Republican president, we're supposed to believe the president is all powerful. When there's a Democratic president, we're supposed to believe the president has absolutely no power to do anything. It's a lot of nonsense. The president is enormously powerful. The executive branch has an enormous amount of legislative power. You may ask, well, what kind of power? Well, the executive branch is making all sorts of decisions about where spending happens, where projects go. There's all sorts of flexibility and authority that the executive branch has. Members of Congress want, I'm giving you one example here, they want spending in their district. They want projects in their district, and the president has the ability to choose that. Now, I'm not saying you got to go about it in a kind of corrupt way that Donald Trump often went about it, but this has been the push and pull of politics for 100 years, right? Like Lyndon Johnson, other presidents of both parties. This is how you wield power. And the point is that in order for progressives to get what they say they want, they're going to have to try to animate the president to use that power to pressure the right wing of the Democratic Party in Congress.
Well, I also think it goes to psychology because besides the fact that obviously he fooled a lot of people, one of the biggest problems President Obama, or weaknesses, he left his huge organizing army on the White House lawn. I mean, he ran one of the best campaigns to that point ever. He had this huge army of volunteers, huge army of activists, and he just left them at the altar. And I think right now, progressives have significantly more than Joe. There's not a huge army behind Joe Manchin other than Wall Street, whereas Bernie still has, his campaign apparatus, maybe not, the actual apparatus, but the movement behind it. Same thing goes for the squad. So I get the notion of, well, this is better than nothing, but people didn't necessarily elect these folks to get that better than nothing. They elected them, as AOC said, to bring the ruckus to the Democratic Party. So I do think there's a bit of, kind of a not using your leverage when it's just a gaping opportunity, especially during a pandemic, which is a segue to this next question, because I see the media just like asserting as fact that, oh, Joe Manchin has to act this way because it's the only way he could win in West Virginia. And basically painting this picture that places like West Virginia, they don't want a $15 minimum wage wouldn't be popular there. Medicare for all wouldn't be popular over there. I mean, it's just not true. And it goes down the list. Part of why Trump was popular there was because he fooled people into thinking he was a populist. And they liked that populist rhetoric. So do you feel like, Bernie was asked on MSNBC, well, would you go to West Virginia and pressure Manchin? I mean, couldn't the same thing be said for the progressives pressuring Biden? Because from what it stands now, I'm not hearing anything about $15 minimum wage. Okay, we couldn't get it because the, president parliamentarian, which is another topic. But I don't see any follow through on, all right, let's make that the priority now before infrastructure. I mean, you don't have a crystal ball, but I guess I'm asking, why don't progressives pressure Biden the same way that Manchin is pressuring Biden?
Well, I think they have been brought into the White House. They have a relationship with the presidential administration that they haven't had really in at least probably in my lifetime. Meaning, what I mean by that is that the Biden administration has done a good job of creating a dialogue, of making them feel valued, by having meetings with them and making them feel part of the process. It's smart politics. I want to credit to the Biden folks. I mean, it's not rocket science, right? I mean, but credit to the Biden folks nonetheless for making the progressive wing of the party feel like they're part of the conversation, which, by the way, is different than how the Obama administration treated progressive members of Congress. Now, of course, the downside is that getting essentially schmoozed, getting worked, getting made to feel like, hey, we're all friends, we're all working together. And again, I'm not against, sort of team spirit and everyone standing in solidarity, but there's a fine line between, solidarity, allyship, and getting schmoozed and worked. And the problem is that the problem is that when push comes to shove, you have to be willing to have that meeting with, Chief of Staff Ron Klain, or have that meeting with Joe Biden and be cordial and nice and civil, and then say, it's great, I'm glad to be here in the Oval Office, but if you don't meet my demands, you don't have my vote. And I don't think yet that progressive lawmakers in Congress, by and large, have figured out how to have a working relationship with the White House while also standing their ground in a clear way. I think, frankly, a lot of them are probably afraid that if they stood their ground and created any kind of direct conflict with the White House, that they would lose that access, that they would lose that relationship. And to be honest, maybe they would. But ultimately, the question is, why are you there? Right. Ultimately, the only power, I would say the biggest power, a rank and file member of Congress, let's say in the House, has, is their vote. Right. Everything else is sort of soft power, press releases and the public platform and going on TV. But the hard power that you have as a member of Congress, especially in a narrow House, a narrowly divided House, is your vote. That's where your real power is. And, another example of this is the conservative Democrats in the House have said that they won't vote for a tax reform package unless it includes new deductions for state and local taxes, which is essentially would mostly benefit the very wealthy in this country. That's not disputable. That's just data. Some Democrats from wealthier districts have said we will not vote for a tax package unless these tax breaks are put in the bill. And essentially what they have done, we talked about the Manchin example, but what they have done in the same way is say, look, we understand that our power in a narrowly divided House is our vote, and we're threatening to withhold our vote unless our demands are met. And the progressive members of Congress have never done that. They have not done. Now, it's still early. Maybe they will do that, but they have not yet done that. And ultimately, my view is if they don't do that on some basic issues like a $15 minimum wage, good example, then it reduces the chance that those priorities will ultimately get legislated.
And also, the bottom line is, it doesn't matter if you have access if they're just going to moonwalk on every promise they made. I mean, Biden made one promise. I mean, he talked about restore the soul of blah, blah, blah. $15 minimum wage. That's the only economic promise he made. You could throw in $2,000 checks, and he's moonwalking. And part of why he's moonwalking, because there's no one to challenge him. And I think AOC and these progressives, they know how to whip up a crowd on social media, digital media, organizing, even during a pandemic. And it's kind of like you're not using one of your best tools, just like Obama. Obama could have barnstormed the country if he wanted to against McConnell and the rest. They're just choosing not to. Wanted to ask you also one point.
And let me add one quick thing. They could be the lowest profile members of Congress. The progressive caucus members of Congress. If you give me 10 of those members of Congress who have no Twitter feeds, no public profile at all, but they simply say, we are 10 members of Congress, 10 Democrats. Our votes are needed to pass any legislation because there's no Republican votes available for something, for most things that the Biden administration is pushing. They're all going to vote no. So you need our 10 votes to pass anything. And we have no public profile at all, but we have these demands. You must meet these demands to get our vote. Now you've created a problem for the White House. Now you've created a problem that Joe Biden needs to fix, needs to use the power of the White House to get a deal that, if not satisfies those demands, at least moves legislation at least closer to those demands, at least incorporates some of those demands.
Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.